Welcome everyone to the final Zoom meeting of the King's Lynn Gansey KAL. If we play our cards right, we're actually going to get Zoom bombed by my latest studio cat, who is a design cat. And boy, does he ever help with knitting. There's his head. Yes, you're very helpful. Anyway, I am so glad that you guys could join us on a very cold day, which really does inspire me with sweater knitting. And this is so distracting. You've just got to like move on, move on. There we go. Okay. This is the one where we wrap it up. Obviously, to anybody watching either now or later, we don't expect anybody when we run KALs to actually have something as complex as a full Gansey finished in the amount of time that we've had for the KAL. But that means that, you know, as long as you post somewhere, anywhere, and let us know your progress, then you're eligible for prize draws. And each one of our KALs will have a prize draw. Oh, I see. He managed to set my phone so that now my swatch is no longer zoomed in. Wow. I am not doing a great job of hosting this meeting. It's been one of those days. What can I say? Hosting the meeting normally means you have your equipment all set up in advance and it's all perfect. And I'm like, I don't get why my camera will not behave itself. So we'll just not worry about that and keep moving. Anyway, we don't expect anyone to have the project finished. We will be drawing for a prize and then teasing the next KAL, which won't be for a few months yet, but we will be having another one. And so I'll just give a little couple of tidbits on that one. Anyway, what we want to do with this particular KAL is just basically do a little bit of revisiting about the fact that this was a really interesting and fun project. I know Jesse and I were discussing together just a little while ago about how excited we were when we got the submission from Cheryl in terms of Gansey, because we were really, really looking forward to something that was really interesting and unique and different. And boy, did Cheryl come through for us on that. Of course, anybody who's familiar with the North Sea collection will know that the entire collection has a lot of unique things. And Cheryl, oh my goodness, her stuff was just so juicy and so delicious that in the end, she ended up contributing 4 stunning pieces to the collection. When the Gansey itself arrived, we opened the box. It was all carefully packaged. I unfolded the tissue paper and packaging, and we gasped. We literally gasped because it's such a beautiful sweater. And it has been so interesting to look at how it's constructed and learn from the various techniques, because I will admit that I have only ever knit very simple Ganseys. So this one had some techniques in terms of how the shoulders are handled that I found a lot of fun. So when we saw that Gansey, we knew we had to do something beyond just publishing the design. And so it's been really wonderful to run a knit along for everyone to be able to participate. So in terms of the people who are here live with the final Zoom, you are welcome to jump in at any time. So we have a nice tight group tonight. So if there's things that you want to contribute, comments you want to make, questions you want to ask, do feel free. You can also pop things into the chat. But yeah, we were pretty excited to run this one, and it has been a ton of fun for us. And it's been really enjoyable to watch the various different sweaters in progress. I will admit there's one that I'm seriously envious of, because it turns out that we chose exactly the same color, she and I, and so she is ahead of me, and I'm like, ooh, if only I could reach through the computer and steal that sweater, because it is so beautiful. Anyway, did you have anything you wanted to say right now, Jesse, about the sweater itself and, you know, how you're feeling about knitting?
It's mainly I'd been hoping for a while now that we'd have a Gansey pattern to publish, and so yeah, when that one came in, I was like, yes, a Gansey, this is perfect, and it just looked just great. I love how the textures work together. I love how they balance each other, how they mirror each other in the correct places, and how they all get set up and flow neatly together. It's definitely a well-designed piece.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it because it was never boring. I will admit that a couple of the Ganseys that I knit years ago were less than exciting for me, because most of the body would be either plain or just like moss stitch. So this one I've really enjoyed because it does have that variety in it, and it's not horribly difficult, but it's just kept it, you know, fresh and interesting to knit. I'm going to admit I'm not finished either. So if anybody's watching this and guilty because they're not finished, you're in good company. Unfortunately, some of us apparently had cast-on-itis last fall, and when we went to count up our projects that needed finishing, I had 22 of them a few weeks ago. So somebody needs to knock off a few whips out of her list here before she starts anything new. Anyway, so pattern's a lot of fun. We have all agreed on that. And the next thing that I wanted to do in this particular Zoom was to give some hints about finishing, some tips and tricks, share some wisdom and some stuff there, because no matter how many sweaters you've knit, there's always something to learn about the finishing process on it. So the first thing that I wanted to look at actually ties into the second thing, and that's blocking sweaters. I know the first time I knit a sweater, I had no idea what to do with blocking it, and it had its issues, but admittedly that sweater had issues all along anyway, so we won't go back and revisit that one. But this particular sweater, there's a few things about it that do mean that one has to kind of examine how one blocks and finishes it and make some choices. So when you're finishing, blocking a garment, no matter whether it's a cowl or mitts or a shawl, sweater, you name it, there's a number of reasons to do that. And so one of them is that how you're knitting along and you think that you're doing an amazing job with your tension, and you look at it later and you see a few wonky stitches in there. When you knit, your tension is usually pretty even, but there will be little bits of, variation here and there. And if you give the yarn the opportunity to just move around and relax, then what you'll see is a lot of those little tiny unevennesses will disappear. So this swatch that you'll see on one of the cameras here, when I knit this swatch, and oh my goodness, this thing is behaving weird. When I knit the swatch was really lumpy and bumpy because I was too lazy to go find the other needles that would make it better. And so it was kind of a mess. But when I blocked the swatch, all of a sudden, all those wonky stitches and all of that just smoothed right out, and the yarn bloomed up and filled in really nicely. So blocking a sweater, whether it's, a simple type of blocking or a more complex one, does make the final product look better. And what you might see as something undesirable in terms of maybe an uneven row or a little bit of, twist in your, what do you call it? Ribbing. Thank you, brain. That will disappear in the blocking. So again, like this little swatch, which I don't have spotlighted right now, but I'm showing the ribbing there. Good Lord, this is strange to be moving this around. This phone is misbehaving, so it's really hard for me to center it. Normally it's in a different angle. Anyway, this looks really nice and even. It's just 2x2 ribbing, but when I initially knit it, it was not even or anything like that. So blocking does make a difference. Now, there's a number of different varieties and styles of blocking. So one of them that I'm particularly fond of when I do a big shawl is wet blocking. And that's where you're actually going to take your item and you're going to soak it. Then you're going to press some water out, and then you're going to lay it out in the size and shape that you want and let it dry. That's a really good way of doing things if you do have a lot of uneven stitches, or if you're blocking something like lace or a texture pattern that you want to open out. One of the downsides with wet blocking is that if you're trying to press water out and you have something like cables or texture stitches that you don't want flattened, wet blocking can actually be a detriment to that. So there are other ways of doing it, but I just want to talk a little bit more about the wet blocking before we get to that. When you're wet blocking, there's perceived wisdom that is often found out there online and so on. And it talks about how you have to soak your item for a long period of time. And sometimes it suggests overnight. It'll tell you to use hot water and so on. If you're working with hand-dyed yarn, some of the perceived wisdom around wet blocking can actually be problematic. Particularly think about what happens to reds. So wet blocking, one of the ways to help when you are doing this with hand-dyed yarn is don't use hot water. You really only need water warm enough that your hands are not going to go, oh my goodness, they're making my knuckles hurt. And what you're going to do is put a little bit of acid in it, whether it's vinegar or lemon juice or citric acid. What you want to do is acidify your water a little bit, because that's going to help protect the dye in your item and keep it from bleeding. And any sort of hand-dyed items, they're not going to have a lot of like carding and spinning oils from the milling process left in them. So you really don't have to worry about leaving them to soak for a long period of time, because they'll absorb water very quickly. When I teach dye classes, I've shown people how, good quality skeins of yarn will soak water up within 2 or 3 seconds. With knitting, depending on your gauge, tension, and fiber content, it might need as long as 5 minutes, but if you squeeze it gently, it'll pick up water really fast, and that little bit of acid will just protect your color. Especially if you're doing a garment that has a lot of variegated colors, or maybe you have a yoke where you've got stitches in white and stitches in another darker color, that bit of acid is going to make a lot of difference in terms of protecting your color. This can help with commercial yarns as well, because it all depends on what dye they've used to dye the commercial yarns. And sometimes the mills are using the same dyes that hand dyers are using. So that can help protect them. I saw a comment in the chat about not seeing the swatch. I am going to spotlight the swatch and talk about it more so that you can really see it well, because I will say that, you know, having to find it in the gallery right now is a little bit of a challenge. So I'll make sure that it is shown really, really well. Now, this particular Gansey has a lot of texture stitches. There is all sorts of interest value, and wet blocking, if you really soak that garment and then roll it up in a towel, which is what you often do to remove some of the moisture once you've wet your garment really thoroughly, could flatten out those lovely patterns. So you can really crush some of that, especially if there's cables in your sweater. Sometimes like really soaking your blocking is not the best choice. So there's other ways to handle that. One of them is that you can steam block. So if you have an iron that has a steam function, you can put lots of water in your iron, lay your sweater out to the size that you want, and then you can gently let the steam go into your sweater. Do not touch it with the iron, just hold it about 1 inch above, and you can let it steam. If your iron isn't producing a lot of steam, take a damp cloth and lay it over the knitting, and then just hold the iron right above that. And then the heat from the iron will actually cause the towel or whatever you've got over top of it, like a tea towel, not a bath towel, to put some steam in there, and it'll just gently moisten your sweater, which will again allow that yarn to move, and it will allow, if it's a wool fiber, to bloom and go back to the way it was on the sheet, which makes it a lot nicer. So it fluffs it up. This swatch, which you'll see later, when I knitted it, looked really scraggly, and I kind of wish I'd taken a picture of it before and after. But by gently blocking it, that allowed that fiber to just fluff up and then really look finished, and it looks like a proper knit fabric at that point. So steaming is one way that you can do this. There is lots more information online, but it is a way of blocking that will preserve the height and texture in things that you're blocking. And then a third way of blocking is you can take a spray bottle and you can just gently spritz the item, let it sit for a few minutes, and then that lighter amount of water will soak in, depending on the fiber content. And that is another way of getting it damp so that you can then stretch your knitting and, you know, wiggle it back and forth and so on, get that yarn to even out, get those stitches to relax. But again, you won't lose the texture on it. So this is something, if I have a shawl, for example, that's highly textured, looking at you, Stephen West, and the thing that I'm knitting right now, that one would be better off spray blocked rather than wet blocked, because there's raised areas in it, and I don't want the effort that I put into to create those to then be crushed down and flattened. So choosing the blocking based on the garment can make quite a difference. Wet blocking is lovely, and I will say that that's my favorite way of blocking, but for this particular Gansey, myself, I'll choose one of the other types just because I don't want to crush all those beautiful textures and interesting things that make the Gansey so appealing. So with blocking, that's something that's really important, is to choose the style. Now, one of the things that can happen when you're blocking a sweater, whether it's wet or sprayed or steamed, is that you'll get a fold along the side of the sweater, and that can be really annoying. So I just thought I'd pass along something that I've been doing for years that kind of gets rid of that. And it works really well for things like cowls as well. So there's two things that you can do. Is one, get not a face cloth, but you know, the little towels that are about this big by this big, get them and roll them up, and then gently put them inside the sweater along the sides so that the sweater is now traveling around a curve, and then leave those in while you're letting it block. Another that you can use is to go to the hardware store and buy yourself some doweling. So you can get dowels that are 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, even 1 inch, but I stay with 1/4 to 1/2 inch. And again, you can take that dowel and you can put it in where the fold would occur. And again, it will put that fabric around a curve so you don't end up with that big nasty folded line. This is great for cowls too, because if you want to put the cowl under a bit of tension, for example, like if you're blocking stranded color work, then you can actually put a couple of pins down to hold the dowels tensioned, and you won't get a line on your cowl. So that's just a little tip that I have been doing for years, and it means I don't get those lines down the side. It's kind of like if you don't want lines on your hats, put them on with a balloon inside them, or you can get like a styrofoam head from WR Display for $7 and name it Herkimer, something like that. But the idea is to hold it out and just try and prevent some of those unsightly little things that can be so annoying when you go to wear them. The thing that always drives me nuts too is if I get a fold line and it's not exactly centered on a row of knitting, then it just makes my the OCD side twitch. So those are just a couple of little things that I like to do. And then another thing that I usually do when I am blocking something is I will actually put a fan on the blocking. So just a plain old fan and just have it blowing on there. If you live in a humid climate, of course, this will speed it up. But one of the things that I've found too is that it just sort of helps that wool to fluff up a bit. It just puts air through it and lets it just loft up a little bit. So you get just a slightly fluffier result. And it's generally just a little bit nicer to the handle. So I don't know why. You know, I'm sure that we could look at the physics of how the fan works, but it's something that I always do when I'm blocking again too, is I always put a fan on it, and it doesn't have to be on a high speed or anything like that. But when I can, I do, and it just seems to make it that much nicer. And again, it will speed it up. So like if I do a worsted shawl and I've wet blocked the living daylights out of it, if I put a fan on it, it's dry by the next morning here in Calgary. So that's one of my little tips there. So that's my blocking tips. Jessie, Wendy, do you have anything you'd like to add in?
Not lots, just I did have occasion to use a fan to really try to speed something up when I had to send it into a magazine once, and a hairdryer because it was a desperate situation. It was very tight to the deadline because it was a long time.
Yeah, I will admit that I've dried things with a hairdryer myself, and quite often I'm impatient when I'm trying to like do a swatch and see what it looks like. So I'll often use a hairdryer on those. And that really does get the cats going because they're like, "Ooh, you have a flapping piece of knitting. I'll take that." So yeah, hair dryers can help too. But I will say too, if you have a fancy schmancy hair dryer and you lose your mind and decide to hair dry an entire big worsted shawl, your hair dryer will never be the same. So just bearing that little thing in mind. Our wonderful participants tonight, do you have any questions, comments at this point? Everybody is shaking their heads, so okay, not a problem. Okay, now we get to the other thing that I wanted to talk about, which is the idea about weaving in ends. And so this is something I'm asked a lot about, and I'm actually going to be doing a class later this year on weaving in, because this is like so nuanced and there's so many different ways to do it and different tips and tricks, but I thought I would offer a few because this sweater, while it's not, you know, a color work or anything that's going to events, we'll still have a few. So weaving in ends, there are various different ways to do it. And one of the concerns that always comes up is, do I weave them in before I block or after I block? So one of the things, if you're working with something like a wool yarn like we used for the King's Lynn Gansey, I'm sure that some people have knit it with other yarns as well, but if it's a nice real wool yarn, and if it's not a super wash, usually what I tend to do is break the end of the yarn off, and I will weave in before I block, give it a little tug once I've woven them in, and then what I'll do is leave the end a little nubbin sticking out, go ahead and do my blocking so my ends are woven in first, and then what it actually does is it makes the end of your yarn that's still popping out just fuzz up a little bit. And the neat thing about that is those don't pop out again after that. So you can actually let the wool work for you, and it'll just fuzz out when you're doing the blocking. So it just has that little bit of friction and it goes all nice and fuzzy. If you're using something like a super wash or a combination like that has nylon in it, like with our sock NATO or something, you can actually manually do that. And you can take, I usually just take the, the darning needle or bodkin that I'm using to weave in, and I'll just break the end up on it and fray it out. And that also does a lot to help the popping of the ends. When it's a superwash yarn, I will sometimes wait with that process until after I've blocked, because superwash is really prone to then, like, ooh, I've blocked and now I'm just going to pop the whole end out for you. How is that? So what I might do is weave them in, but don't cut them off. Leave them hanging. Do everything that you need to do in terms of your blocking and all of that. And then once your blocking is done, the ends are going to be bedded into the fabric a little bit. Then you can cut them off and do that little bit of fraying the end out. Now, I was really delighted one time when I saw a Patty Lyons lecture, because Patty talks about fraying out those ends too. And I was like, oh, this is approved by somebody who is, really in the know and all of that. And it does work wonders. But with real wool yarns, you don't even need to do that because the blocking process will actually do it for you. Sometimes, if it's a fuzzy yarn, maybe a boucle or something like that, I will wait to weave my ends in until I've done the blocking, because it can just be a little bit harder to see what's going on and get everything lying nice and flat and so on. So with the weaving in of ends, you know, you've got some choices and some decisions to make there in terms of what you do with it and when in the process you do it. Myself, if I have a lot of ends going, looking at you, Stephen West shawl upstairs being knit and has a million colors, and, you know, why on earth do I do this to myself? I'll weave ends in periodically as I go, because if I leave them all for the end, then I will lose my mind and probably never finish the shawl. So that is a possibility. I know with this sweater, I haven't woven in any of the ends at this point in time. So I myself will do that. I'll cut them with a little nubbin, and then I'll block the sweater, and that'll just fuzz those ends, bed them in really well. And then that will mean they aren't going to pop on me later. So what I'm going to do now is spotlight my swatch and just show you some ideas about ways to weave them in, and talk about when this can be a little bit like how to make the choices and stuff like that. This one, spotlight. Whew! It worked and everything. So this is a swatch that I did, and I used the same yarn that is made in the King's Lynn Gansey. And what I did was I wove ends in both in the original color, and then I picked a really strongly contrasting color, and I used a bunch of different techniques. So there's various different ways to do it, and it's kind of fun for me because the way that I normally weave ends in, I never ever see recommended anywhere, and yet it's a really great way to do it. So the way that I normally weave ends in is what you see here, and I've deliberately left some ends sticking out so you can see where they are. But this is something that I've seen referred to in some patterns that I bought recently that are Fair Isle as catching the heel of the stitch. And I like it because it's invisible on both sides. It doesn't really affect the tension of the yarn. And it's really easy to do, particularly when you have stocking stitch. Weaving the ends in can be really annoying because they can show. One of the ways that you'll see a lot in various different publications and videos and so on is basically catching the heel of the stitch, but it's done on an angle. So you just catch a stitch in each row as you go, and then turn and catch them in another direction. As you can see, it's tucked in nicely, and it's not hugely visible at all on the front side of my swatch. But the thing that I can find annoying about it is that if you've got something like a shawl where you see both sides, it's really visible. So catching the heel of the stitch is actually really nice for something like a shawl. You'll notice that I've left the little ends popping out here, and that was partly so that I could actually identify where they are for you, and partly so you can see about how far I would leave it before blocking. So let me turn that so you can see the length of end that I'll leave on this yarn. So once I would block again, the end will fuzz out, and you can see this one here, hopefully if this camera's picking it up well, is fuzzier, and that was in there when I blocked the swatch. So this too, where's the one here? Oh, good Lord, it's disappeared. Okay, so this is an example of an end that was in the swatch while I was blocking it. You see how it's no longer cut square, how it's fuzzy? So that's the kind of thing that'll happen if you weave in the ends before blocking, is it'll do that, and that's not going to pop out. That catches really nicely on the knitting. So different ways of doing it and what they look like. When you're working with stocking stitch, catching the heel of the stitch is really nice. And this is done with a contrast yarn so that you can see that what I've done is I've woven through a line of purl bumps, and then I turn and I go back through and I weave through another line of purl bumps. It's a really easy way to do this because you'll always find them. And if it's the same color yarn, you will never see it on the other side. If it's a different color yarn, you can see that you absolutely can. So the dark green is showing through because this is a bit of a meshy fabric. So this is a great way of hiding in your ends and so on, if you're going into the same color of yarn. If I was doing a shawl that was multicolored and I was weaving in ends using this technique, I would just simply get myself up to a section that would be in the same color that I'm weaving in, and then use this style. The thing I like about this style is it never comes out. So I've woven in ends on things that I've had for decades, and they just haven't come out. If I leave a little bit of an end like that so that I can get a little bit of fraying going, they stay really well. It's also a good way to weave in ends on something like garter stitch. So I have a section of this swatch where I've got some garter, and again, I've done this in white and I've left a loop so you can see where it is, but you can see in garter stitch, it's quite almost invisible, because what I've done is I've caught the purl bumps, or what they look like purl bumps, on this one row of garter, and then I've come back in the same row of garter on the other side. And once I give that just a little bit of a tug, then it really does disappear into the knitting quite nicely. In the green, you can see it, but it gives you an idea of what it looks like when you're doing it. So this again is a technique I don't see mentioned a lot, but works quite nicely. There's another way if it's garter stitch, and you know, all of the patterns that we're doing will have all sorts of different stitches, and that's to actually weave the end in the ditch. Now, if it's a different color, this is catching one leg of a stitch. So you pull your garter stitch apart and you're catching one leg of the stitch. And this is a good way to catch them, but it is visible. So even on the back side, you'll see it a little bit if it's not the same color as the garter. But on the other hand, wherever I did it with the white, I'm having trouble identifying it. Okay, there's white in here. And so it does hide it really well if it's the same color. So with garter stitch, that's another nice way of weaving in the ends because it stays put and it doesn't show through on the other side. So you can see in this section here, where I've got a whole bunch of ends woven in, they're not showing at all. So for our Gansey, if you were weaving ends in on the stocking stitch in the same color, you could either do catching the heel of the stitch like this, or you could do the V shape, because on the inside of the Gansey, you're not going to see that often. So having the V is not going to hurt, and it really doesn't show on the other side at all. It's nice and smooth on stocking stitch. If you're weaving your ends in on ribbing, this is something I'm asked a lot about, and there's a nifty way to do it, and it doesn't show at all. And again, it's basically catching a stitch. So I've actually woven an end through this entire area of ribbing, and you can't see it on this side, and you definitely can't see it on the back side. I did it in green so that, again, it's a little bit more visible for you, but I do have a needle here and a bit of yarn, and I'm going to show you what that's like, because when you finish this Gansey, you're going to finish up on the collar there, and you will have some ends to weave in, and you will be right by ribbing. So the way that it's done is we have our ribbing, and I'm sorry this is a bit sideways, it's the camera's fighting me. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my needle and I'm actually going to just wrap it through the slit, one leg of the stitch. I'm on the wrong side, and what I'm going to do is use the stitch that looks like a knit stitch. So you see how all the legs now have the needle through them. And then you pull your yarn through. Give it a little tug because you don't want, when you weave your ends in, for that to pinch up your stocking stitch. Turn it around, and then you can either go through a leg of the stitch next to it, or you can actually go back through the leg on the other side of the same stitch. And it will not actually show any worse than it would if you were going on the other stitch. Now, there's one thing that throws people too, is that I can't go and do it the same way that I did before. It's really awkward to maneuver my needle. So what you want to do is work with the stitches and just change the direction that you're wrapping the yarn when you're going the other direction. The stitches will guide you, and this is a really great way to secure your ends. Give it a gentle little tug, pull it again, and then this end is in there forever. This is a fantastic way to weave in ends on sock cuffs, because again, you'll never see them. They don't show through on the other side, and they stay there forever. So really great way to weave in ends if you've got ribbing. In the Gansey, if you are going to weave in ends, one of the places that you can weave them in, like I say, is in the ribbing, or what you can do is put your weaving in on the side of the sweater where it's not as visible, in case you actually have a little bit of tensioning issue. When you're doing the catching the stitch, what you're doing is you're just catching the purl bump, and you're doing this diagonally. And I'm going to hold this up once I've caught a few more so that you can see what I've done. So you're doing it like that. You're going to pull your yarn through. And when you change directions, don't pull it super tight. You want to have some flex there so that the sweater can still move and it won't cause your end to pop out then. So when I go in the other direction, I can catch a purl bump. And I'm actually going through another woven in end, but that really does not matter. So you change directions, so you're going in a V, and you want to leave a little bit of slack there, and just give a little bit of tug so that that end is then going to stay there. This allows the garment to still be flexible, and again, this doesn't show badly on the other side. This is a very meshy swatch, so you see just a tiny bit of that. And then another one that people like sometimes is the business where you're doing the duplicate stitch on the inside. And I just will mention that when you're doing stocking stitch, duplicate stitch, it can show. So with the green here, you can see how unless you're super, super careful, it's really easy to have it show between the stitches. So if you need to use the duplicate stitch on a looser fabric, make sure it's the same color, because then your eye will skip right over it. And if you can't, choose a different method. So what the duplicate stitch is literally just weaving it through the stitch in the same path that the original yarn took. Let's see if I can turn this so that we can get this vertical. So you can see the duplicate stitch. If I was doing this on stocking stitch, I would put it under my arm or on the side of the sweater, because then it's going to be less visible. On this Gansey, when I've been weaving in on a stocking stitch area, this is the kind of thing that I'll do, because you'll never see it on the other side. It's better to me than this. Now, there's other people who swear by duplicate stitch, but the other thing I don't like about it is it's quite a bit of volume. It can be quite thick. So if it was a worsted yarn I was knitting with, it's not going to flex the same way. And what's going to happen is that when you wear the garment, it's going to be visible. All of these, you can see, have a little bit of end left. And if it was a superwash, where's my needle? What I would do is, and you can do this with non-superwash too, is just take that needle and break that stitch up a bit. So once you've fluffed it up, the nice thing is that the end won't show as much. So now you can hardly see the end. And this is going to stay. It's not going to pop out, and it's not going to be super visible. So this is a nice way to deal with your end, is just leave yourself a little nub in there and then just break it up and stretch it out like that. And it will felt down into the fabric. Even if it's superwash, it's going to stick itself down into the fabric over time. So a great way, again, to do the ends on shawls that are made out of superwash, because they will stop doing that. Oh, look, I've popped a stitch. Oh, look, I've popped a stitch. And then last but not least, I always turn a corner when I'm weaving an end in, no matter what method I'm using. And the reason for that is if that you did accidentally catch that somehow, if it's gone around a corner, friction will mean that your whole end won't get pulled back out again. So going back the other direction is a way to secure the end permanently. Even if it's superwash and it pops a few stitches, it's not going to pop past around the corner. So this is just something that I like to do when I'm weaving in my ends to make sure they stay there forever. And then when you weave your end in, if you pull it tight, you might be able to see it, but just give yourself a little tug, leave this, do your blocking, and then once your blocking is finished, come back. You can then cut your ends at that point in time, but you can also check the tension on this, because it's entirely possible it may have actually been too tight still, or you can tighten it up a little bit. There's a million different other ways of weaving in ends. And, you know, there's one that's kind of fun. Stephen West has named it Weaving Stephen, although that's been going on for years and years and years before him. But with that one, you can really see it. And if you do that and don't go back and tighten it later, it's very noticeable and very visible. So I'm happy to do a Weaving Stephen, but I always go back and just give the end a little tug just to make it look a little bit less noticeable and make it a little bit more tidy and a little less prone to popping. So are there any questions at this point? Because I have done a big brain dump on you on weaving ends in, but I did think it was useful for the KAL to just have a couple of ideas of how to handle ends when you're dealing with things like ends up by ribbing, and when you're working with places where you've got stocking stitch. The neat thing about texture stitches, like some of the charts that we have in this particular sweater, is that you can weave your ends in however you want on the back and you'll never see it on the front. But sometimes they show up right where they might be most noticeable, and they can be a bit frustrating. So I thought a little bit of guidance would not go amiss. So any questions? Jessie, Wendy, anything you'd like to add? Like I say, there's a million different ways to weave ends in, and I just covered a few of them there and didn't give you a full technique demonstration, but that would take hours. I just wanted to make a few suggestions of what I find works really nicely with the yarn and the sweater.
I was just going to say that I've always done the catching the heel of the stitch, but I never knew that's what it was called. And when you first described it, I thought, I've never heard of that until I saw it in action.
You never see it like just in straight lines. Like if you went and Googled 10 ways to weave in ends, it won't be in there. It never shows there. And I had no idea what the name for it was. My mom showed it to me when I was a miserable little 5-year-old trying to deal with my ends then. And I've always woven them in this way because that's the only way she ever did it. And it wasn't until I got into knitting a bunch of Fair Isle hats that I noticed in the pattern, it said, weave the ends in by catching the heel of the stitch. And I'm like, it has a name. Who knew? Now, I know my mother did a lot of color work when I was young, so my guess is that she did learn as a Fair Isle knitter, and that's where she got the method from. So I thought that was really neat.
Yeah.
And it's also a way that works super well if you have a non-superwash, because it will disappear into the stitches and it sticks to itself. And with that, you only need, like if you're doing a Fair Isle hat with, say, Jameson and Smith, or if you're doing a Fair Isle hat and you're using Harley, you only need to do it for like an inch, inch and a half, because the wool will just stick to itself and they never come out. And it's super fast. So I will admit that if I do a Stephen West shawl, I do try to do it with non-superwash, because it's so much less work than to weave those ends in. I will admit, and don't tell anybody, but I'm not the biggest fan of the weave in Stephen, because like I say, it's more visible and I like my woven in ends to be subtle.
Yeah. Well, I would like to see everybody's Ganseys, because I have to confess, I did not join in knitting the Gansey. It's on my to-do list, but not yet. So do any of our guests have a whip that they want to hold up and show off? Pretty
No,
please.
I'll show you mine.
Oh, wow.
Oh, that looks nice.
I finally got the front and back connected last evening. You know
Good
what
on
gave
ya.
me the hardest time in this, which is probably nothing more than me not paying attention, is those flags. I kept messing up the flags. And I'm still doing it, but at least I find it the next row and can fix it right away. But yeah, I don't know. I think I was just overconfident and was watching too much TV and knitting, and I spent more time ripping out until I finally got a rhythm down, and now I'm on a roll.
I'll start watching a murder mystery and I'll get all distracted, and then it's like, oh, look at that. Now my flags aren't flag shaped anymore. I will admit that I finally made myself something called a row map, where I actually listed each chart and the row I was on, because if I had to tick it off, then I would check my work, because I was being a ninny about it. I really got to stop watching so many murder mysteries on Netflix, although I think I'm running out of them. Well, I've been watching a lot of them on Prime too. The worst is, like, there's some really good ones, but they have subtitles. So then you're reading the subtitles. And
Oh yeah, no.
like,
I
what have
don't
I
do
done?
subtitles with this one. That's beyond my brain.
I think the top part of this Gansey was not a TV watching
No.
project.
No, it definitely wasn't. That one, actually, I stayed at the studio and I shut the door to my office there, my little design studio area. And I just did that and nothing else, because I kept messing it up because I get distracted. So once I did that, it was okay. And it's not like it was like horribly hard or something. It was just different for me.
Yeah.
I've done some saddle shoulders and things, but I hadn't done one exactly like that. And I do have to say, I am totally stealing Cheryl's idea of the selvage. I'm like, my God, that's brilliant. Like, I think about some of the shawls that I design, and then there you have to pick up stitches. And I'm like, well, you've got to move in and do this. And I'm like, put a selvage on. Woo! So yeah, creating the selvage, I think that broke my brain for an hour or so. And then I was like, I love it.
Okay.
Yeah, when I went up, then after that, this is so much different.
The other Wendy with an eye held up the
Yeah.
sweater. She's got it done.
Wow.
She got it done. Did you get it done in time for Christmas?
I did.
Good for you.
Yeah, what'd your husband think?
He said, when did you get time to knit? Like, he was supposed to not be home and his work finished. So I thought, oh, now I'm going to be messed up. And I thought, I'm just going to knit. And I told him it was for me. And so he believed me. I'll never be able to pull that off again. But yeah, but it's just like, the magic of blocking it is just like, he tried it on I couldn't block it and him not be able to see it.
Yeah.
But he tried it on unblocked, and of course it wasn't opened up enough, and he says, oh, it's too small. And then once it was blocked, oh, this fits good. Yeah.
Nice.
So you did know what you were doing.
I could not knit mine during TV watching. I had to concentrate on this completely. So
Oh,
I-
that's gorgeous.
Oh,
Pretty.
nice.
So
What color is that?
it's the natural color.
Oh,
And I wasn't sure. Everyone has such beautiful colors of theirs, but
That's
Oh,
very
that's
nice.
lovely.
Suddenly,
I'm really enjoying it. Like it's kind of like reading a book that you don't want to end.
yeah,
I'm almost to the part where I have to start stocking stitch. So I'm kind of enjoying just all the charts and all the patterns. So it's been really good. I
That's
can't
awesome.
That's
wait
what-
for it to be done.
this one that, like I say, it really appealed to me because the other sweater that I've got on the go is it had a little bit of color work in the yoke and then it's endless amounts of just plain stocking stitch. So this is way more fun because you keep getting while you're doing it, admittedly, sometimes a little too much. And I will admit that at one point in time when my brain was having trouble, I actually took my printed pattern, because I always print them as well as look at them in like Knit Companion, and I cut the little charts out and stuck them on a paper so they were in the right order, because for some reason I was having trouble and I was reversing the flags. So
Yeah.
you know, it made me feel all virtuous that, you know, I was actually doing something with my printed pattern.
I had trouble trying to follow it in Knit Companion because of the multiple charts. And I finally gave up, and now I'm just using the paper and that colored tape that you can pick and move.
Yeah, I will. That one, I don't think I used Knit Companion much at all. Like I downloaded it into the program and I was like, oh, it looks very pretty in here. And then I took my little scissors, cut my charts up, and funny because the pattern is beautifully organized in terms of, you know, here's A, B, C, and, you know, everything like that, but they're not in the order of knitting across a row, and that, you know, just my brain one night. And so, you know, out came the scissors. So I love Knit Companion, and I know there's a lot of really amazing capacity in there, and I have to wonder if Knit Companion would let you reorganize the charts. I have a sneaking suspicion it would, but I'm just not.
I did mess with it a little bit, and you can create your own page by reorganizing things, but I still couldn't get it all on one page. So I'm still flipping pages, and I said, it's too much work.
If anybody watching this later is curious about that, there are actually some really great Very Pink Knits videos on using some of the more advanced features in Knit Companion. I love the program. You can use the free version, or you can pay a small subscription per year for it. And it would give you a lot of capacity to do some interesting things. I know with certain patterns that have cables, one of the things that I'll do, for example, is I'll highlight everywhere that there is an actual, now we got to do the cable thing. And Knit Companion is glorious for that sort of thing. Little blurb for it. I have no relationship to the makers, but it is a piece of software I really like.
Yeah.
But I also learned to knit more than 50 years ago, so I'm a paper gal at times.
What about you, Linda? Do you have a show and tell?
Oh, wow. Okay, let me
Yeah.
belatedly spotlight Linda so we can see that.
Oh,
That's gorgeous.
what color is that? French
Beautiful
Bordeaux.
color.
Very
And
beautiful.
I have light stitches. I have basically natural daylight or a lot of light.
I hate to say it, Linda, your audio is cutting in and out.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So so this is French Bordeaux, and it's best for picking up stitches with daylight, because with the just any other light, it's very hard to see and very frustrating. But when you're talking about the charts, what I did is, because you've got the charts A, B, C, and then you've got the right and the lefts, and they're going in all the different orders. And it's like, okay, this is going to get confusing because some are 4, some are 8, some are 12, and some are whatever. I'm like, okay, this is just going to send me for a loop. I created a Excel spreadsheet.
Oh,
Yeah, exactly what I did was I made a row map in Excel, because then I can keep on track.
And then I've got each row, and they're kind of shaded for the alternating. And that way I've got what each one is, and I tick off. So then you know how the back is, you do the 8.5, well, for the one I'm doing is 8.5 inches. So I've got it where I go up to the page I'm on, and I ticked off to there, and I said, you know, at the end of the back. So now with the front, I'm going through and I'm ticking them off again. So I'll know where to go. And it kind of helps because when I'm doing the TV watching, to know which row I'm on, I can then see, okay, well, I'm on this particular row. This is what I'm at. The flags, it's kind of getting to know where, you know, because you're going one way and then you go back the other way, how far along you are when you're doing going the back. Because going out, it's like 1 to 5 is easy, or 1 to 7 is easy, but it's the reversing is the hard part. But this helps so much. It was like, it's a game changer just to be able to have a chart that I can follow to know all my rows.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a really great thing. And it's, you know, some feedback that we might pass along to Cheryl, because her patterns are really beautifully written. But I got to admit that, you know, having something like that definitely helps. And there's a few of the European shawl knitters who are including them now. There was one, she's been actually republishing all her patterns to include a chart with all the rows in it. And I thought, well, isn't that a nifty idea? Because it just makes it that little bit easier to know where you are and what's next and that sort of thing. So yeah, I thought it was a really cool thing. Yours is much prettier than mine.
I could probably figure out, I could upload it to Ravelry, and then it's there for whoever wants it.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure there's lots of knitters who would really appreciate that. That is very generous of you.
No problem.
So since we do have some people here, we should probably do a draw for our very last gift certificate. Who wants to do it? Wendy or Dan?
Oh, Dan, let Dan do it. I'll make notes.
We're going to randomly choose one of our people who's in the meeting, and then we'll have a $50 gift certificate, and we will have you contact Wendy, who will set it up for you. So Dan is going to be doing the exciting choice.
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Linda, you are our winner today.
Congratulations, Linda.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I love shopping there.
You are very welcome.
Yeah, we won't tell my husband because he'll probably end up more than 50.
Well, I do have to confess, I recognized everybody's names.
Well, that could be dangerous.
No, it just means I've got a good memory.
Thank you.
So it's positive because, you know, it starts to make us feel guilty, and then, you know, we start doing more draws and stuff like that. I know that happened to me on one Zoom one time. I was like, well, I hadn't planned for one. And then I'm like, I know everybody who's in this Zoom. Well, I guess I'm going to do one, aren't I? By the way, everybody here tonight is still eligible for the grand prize one that we'll be doing the draw for tomorrow. So I'll do a random draw that will include everybody that's posted or, you know, that we've made notes of. And then, you know, I will announce the winner. So it is a grand prize still for the KAL. I love doing prizes. So, you know, this has been a lot of fun for me. I'm like, you know, yay, it's like being the fairy that, you know, goes around and does whatever. I don't get out and really show up.
How many people actually did this, KAL?
I know that when we started, we had close to 75, and I know people that joined later on. So I'm not actually 100% certain of the number. I do know some people are finished already. Some people have just, like, there was one lady, she started 2 weeks ago. So yeah, it's a little bit of one where I don't really know as well as I do with some of the other ones. Sometimes I know the exact number, but this one was just a little bit, you know, what with the Christmas season butting up into the middle of it there, it was a little bit loosey-goosey. But yeah, I was really pleased given that, you know, sweater KALs, this was, I think, the first sweater KAL that we did. So it was really lovely to see quite a large number of participants on a big project like that.
As it could be an indicator of how many, it's hard to say, but I was watching the kind of view counts on the video on YouTube after we posted it. And it looks like a couple hundred people watched the first one and about 70 people got to watch the second one. So like I say, there's a fair number involved here. So
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
It's
and I think being over the holidays really cramped it for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, it was kind of a case of the sweater was just too pretty not to do something
Oh,
like
yeah.
it. It was like, well, we can either wait till next year or, you know, we can get all gung ho and enthusiastic and give it a try. I do agree with the feedback of Christmas. It was a little bit too close. And that was one of the reasons why we moved the third Zoom to after Christmas, was it just made it a little more flexible for everybody. And I think that the next sweater cal we do will start it a lot sooner. So, you know, give a little bit more breathing space, because I know I had a lot of gift knitting. So I will admit that my sweater got parked. I knit, oh, God knows how many hats and the cowl and a couple of other things. And suddenly went, oh my goodness, that's in my pile of whips. So it's gonna have to come back out, because Dan is at some point in time going to notice that the sweater I promised him has not. Yeah, he might be aware of that now.
Yeah. You let that cat out of the bag.
Well, part of the thing that reminded me that I got to get back to it is that actually the cat did remove it from the bag and ran across the room with it. So that little black guy that you saw, you know, doing a little bit of Zoom bombing, he is a character and he is a thief. He's actually quite a big sized cat too. So he can carry off an entire knitting bag when he puts his mind to it. And he's not been as helpful as he might be. At least with this yarn, when he chewed through it, it splices nicely. So that's not quite as annoying as it could have been. But oh boy, I tell you, I was doing the very first of the, you know, like joining the two saddles together. And I think he chewed through it 3 times. I was ready to strangle him. Kittens, can't live with them, can't resist them. Well, I think we are coming to the end of our allotted time. So is there anything else that we want to chat about, my wonderful fellow Zoomers? Or, you know, shall I let you get your knitting?
You mentioned the next knit along.
Oh, right. Yes, I wanted to tease that. So we're planning for not 1, but 2 shawl knit alongs this year. And if you'd like to give us some feedback on when you'd like the first one to start, I would like to do a spring oriented one. And then we're going to do another summer vacation cal as well. So I will not reveal what the project is for that yet, but there will be 2 shawl cals for sure coming up this year. So just a tiny teaser in that, you know, things are afoot. I think I had more to tease and my brain's gone blank, but you know. One of them this year is going to be using the nettle yarn. That was one of the things that I was going to talk about. So you're going to get a chance to try something a little bit different. The nettle yarn is really lovely for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is for a lady like myself with a personal climate zone. It really does help me feel a lot more comfortable. And it's also really glorious for shawls and things like that because of its blocking abilities. Like I'm absolutely enchanted with it in terms of how it blocks and the drape on it and that sort of thing. I know that we have one shawl that's technically a show sample in the DK version of the nettle yarn, and I tend to put it on if I'm doing a Zoom in a room that's really hot because it is so good at stabilizing one's personal climate zone. So yeah, I've used it for that a number of times, and people are thinking I'm wearing it because it's pretty, and I'm like, well, yes, but. So one of the cals is going to involve the nettle yarn, and the other one is going to be a surprise. But there is new yarn afoot at Ancient Art, so keep your eyes open for that one. Yeah, that was the other thing I wanted to tease about the first one. So the spring one is going to be using a new yarn. It's decadent.
Wink, wink.
Yeah, exactly. There's some of it on my desk and I'd like to pet it. So yeah. That'll be interesting. All right. Trying to think if there was anything else that I meant to mention. I can't think of anything.
Well, for me, this has been a good group. I only once ever did a knit along before, and it was very disappointing because it was a very cliquish group.
Oh no.
The Zoom calls, and it was just like, I just sort of gave up on calling after a couple of times but this has been a great group.
Well, that's wonderful. Like I know one of the things that I've been really thrilled with is that every knit along that we've done with Ancient Arts, we've had such a wonderful group of people, and there has been like a lot of support. If people had questions or, you know, just needed someone to help motivate them, everyone has really been wonderful with that sort of thing. So yeah, you
It's
know,
probably because you're Canadians.
I guess that'll do it. It doesn't hurt. But no, we've have a wonderful, you know, online and in-person community, and it's
Yeah.
been really something that I've enjoyed. I think some of the most wonderful things about this business over the last, well, however many years it's been, has been the wonderful people that we've met along the way.
Yeah.
I don't actually know how long we've been doing this now, but I know we've been doing knit-alongs for about 8 years now. And I remember the first one because we were like, okay, let's try our first knit-along, and we had 7 people.
Oh.
The biggest one we did was in partnership with Weave, and we had well over 1,000 with that one. So that was really cool.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, first sweater KAL worked out really well.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess I could tease a little bit. We do have some more collections coming this year. There's smaller collections than the North Sea one. There's still a lot to do, lots of meat on the bone with the North Sea collection and some of the beautiful pieces there. But, you know, we'll have to look at what we get in terms of designer submissions, and we may have to do another sweater KAL. But like I said, we'll start it a little further away from Christmas.
Yeah.
Well, it didn't help that just about everybody got really sick for a while there
Oh,
over Christmas and lost a couple of weeks of time.
Yeah.
yeah, you know the thing when it shows up in the news when it's that bad. And, you know, I was reading about, I know I'm one of the people who picked up something over Christmas. And when you're reading about the thing that you've got in like international news, you know that a lot of people are struggling. Made me feel a little better about the whole thing too. I'm like, okay, it's not in my head. Well, yes and no in a way. Okay, well, any other final comments on this, our last Lynn Gansey Zoom?
I'll
Well-
post the picture when I'm finished.
That will be exciting. And,
Yes.
you know, because I want to do my grand prize draw tomorrow, just throw a picture of in progress anywhere at all, just to make sure that I get your name in there. And, you know, each time you post it gives you another entry. And I just want everybody to have, you know, a chance at that because let's face it, prizes are fun.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
Well, I hope you all have a happy, healthy new year.
likewise,
Next
You
time.
too.
thank you to everybody both here tonight and who will be watching this video later for participating and coming along on our journey. We've enjoyed it greatly. And I hope you enjoy your Lynn Ganseys too.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
You're very welcome. Alrighty, with that, I think that what we'll do is we'll let you get back to your knitting and, you know, maybe a little bit of entertaining beverages and, you know, a nice cup of tea if you're just me, and a copy or, you know, something exciting to read and all the bit. So thanks again, everybody, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.